significant manner, because going from here to a job in housing, that's about as big as it comes in terms of changing your life. You need to have an opening, an opportunity immediately to plug somebody into that kind of system.
Well, you also need to deal with the reason why they're out here, because that it really isn't a choice.
Right.
You know, they're not saying, "Oh, I'm going to move out of my house today and live under a bridge." They have behavioral health issues, they have addiction issues that push them away. You know, they have legal problems. You know, they just don't wake up and say, I'm going to live.
It's like the young man Michael used to teach. He just told me about his issues. They seem fixable, you know, but yet he's out here under a bridge and no direction as to where to go.
And John, when you say capacity, is it, because I heard from Susan that all the beds aren't filled, so is it the capacity in terms of space, or is it capacity in terms of follow-through? Or both?
So what Susan was saying, their program right now has open beds, but do they have the funding to pay people to serve the folks who are going to take over those open beds? Do they have the money to pay for the meals, for the linen, for the janitorial services to keep somebody in that housing situation, and then link them to their counseling and vocational training that can get somebody a real job? Funding determines capacity as much as physical space does.
And I'm asking you a question that's probably asked decision makers at the county level, but as part of the homelessness task force, was there any assessment of, because I know we always talk, I'm just trying to give us some specificity, so was there any or was it one of the recommendations maybe an assessment of capacity so we know exactly what our capacity is, or is that how would I know
capacity of which component? I mean, for instance, right now we know that our emergency shelters, like the Men's Lodge at Gospel Center, the shelter at Stockton Shelter, and the family shelter at Stockton Shelter, those are always at capacity or above capacity. Any of the shelters that we can take a census of really in Stockton or the county that are below capacity because they're only serving a very specific population, and maybe that population isn't seeking out that particular shelter. But by and large, the big shelters we have that serve who you would typically think of as the homeless, those are filled. And those continue to be mostly filled. In terms of capacity for transitional housing, well, as far as I know, transitional housing now in this community is basically new directions. And they're operating with as many beds filled as they can. We're hoping to have some new transitional housing programs come online soon. But again, those are going to take investment, continued investment, not just from the private sector, but from the public sector. Our permanent supportive housing right now is completely filled. That's for people who are homeless and who have ongoing disabilities. That program is operating at capacity and actually could put more people into housing right now, has the money to do that, but because of the local rental market being so tight and landlords being unwilling to rent to people even if their full rent is being paid, Central Valley Housing can't get those folks into housing even though it has the money to do so, and is basically saying to landlords, we will pay you the full rent each month, take these people into housing. A lot of landlords are refusing to do it. So
say that again? Say that again. I want to make sure I understood. I'm sorry.
So for the permanent supportive housing part, you asked about the capacity. Central Valley Housing, for instance, the organization I was up until recently affiliated with, has the money to put more people into permanent homes right now. But landlords are not willing to rent to those people, even though an organization like Central Valley can say, we will guarantee to pay you the rent each month if this person can live there. Landlords are saying, no, we don't really want to rent to your person. We have our pick basically of who we can rent to right now, so we're gonna pick this person over here.
Dumb question. How do they know it's your person? Is there like a Central Valley tag?
Because when you are dealing with somebody who's got any kind of subsidized housing, whether it's Section 8 from the Housing Authority, whether it's permanent supportive housing, there is somebody working with these landlords trying to get these folks into that housing. It's because a lot of these people have had issues obtaining housing in the past and need some help getting into housing. And so there are case managers, there are people actively working with these folks and trying to convince landlords to accept them into housing, but that's been increasingly difficult.
So they fill out a rental application, and it says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And they run a credit check, and they find out these individuals have been convicted of a felony. They're not going to rent to them. That's why Prop 47 and getting all these expungements done is essential. And then, you know, that you want to make sure that this person that you're going to be renting your property to, you know, is going to be a good renter. You know, they are guaranteeing, central housing's guaranteeing the payment.
That speaks in general to the capacity of the community because of a lack of affordable housing. That's something that our community and our county has not done a very good job of as a whole, you know, the past couple of decades. And so that hopefully is also a focus going forward about what our county and what our cities can prioritize in terms of need for the housing stock.
I have two more questions. I'm gonna be quiet.
You bet.
But back on the landlord issue, with a conversation, like, just trying to think in terms without.
Before you do, remember that anything that's going to be in the jurisdiction of the council is a problem.
No, I'm not saying
okay. No, just making sure.
I had a policy thing, but a convening or a conversation with a bunch of landlords around just kind of a presentation on the issues and why it might be a good idea to partner. Would that be helpful, you think, or would the people listen? Or
well, there are efforts among the service provider community right now to try to convene more landlords into some sort of consortium where service providers would have an active or relatively active list about landlords willing to work with the homeless population and where there are openings. Edward Figueroa, St. Mary's Dining Room right now is seeking funding for that type of an effort through a grant, I believe. You'd have to ask him about the specifics.
So talk to Edward. Can you write that down, Patrick?
Yeah, Edward knows a little more about that particular effort. But having a consortium or a meeting of landlords on a regular basis, trying to identify people who are willing to rent to the population could be helpful. I can't see it hurting, although unless there's some real incentive for the landlords, it's going to be really hard to convince them to actually act on that impetus. I mean, if I'm a landlord, I know that this population can be extremely hard on a unit. Well, okay, I'll rent to them, but if I'm renting to them knowing that the deposit isn't going to cover the damages incurred, why am I going to do that?
And the Central, that's not what's up on that. Is Central Valley, you guys make, given the population is quote unquote difficult population, is there any kind of case management work you guys do with folks once you put them in permanent housing? You guys prioritize clients based on readiness for housing?
The permanent supportive housing.
Just to add on that, do they go straight from this situation to permanent housing, or is there a process in between?
They can go straight to permanent housing here if they qualify for the permanent housing. And remember, right now, to qualify for permanent housing, you need to be on the street for more than a year straight, or over the past 3 years, have 4 separate episodes of homelessness totaling more than a year, and be permanently disabled. So that's the only slice of the population that can get into permanent supportive housing right now.